David Brewster here in an episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Twisted Sister, yet another important and influential 80s hard rock and hair metal band. And Twisted Sister formed in New Jersey in 1972 and had some initial lineup changes. I think they were originally known as Silver Star. Dee Snider eventually joined the band in 1976, and they eventually became known as Twisted Sister. And definitely they erupted in the early 80s alongside bands like Riot and Leppard, and helped usher in, hard rock and metal in the early 80s. In the guitar department in the classic, era, you had J.J. French and Eddie Ojeda, and they definitely, played a lot of important things on the guitar. So their music was very influential and important, but so was their image, the bullseye graphics on their guitars and glam, face paint and stuff like that, and poofy hair and whatever, and Marshall stacks on stage and everything. So it was, obviously the music was important, but it was that 80s image that was very important too. And just as a reminder, but Dee Snider literally went to bat for the music industry back in 1985 and helped fight censorship and the PMRC, on Capitol Hill alongside people like Frank Zappa and John Denver. And it seems like a lot of people forgot that Dee Snider did that, but yeah, he really did. And he fought for our rights, to keep censorship and the PMRC from changing everything. And I have a feeling if that trial would have went differently, like if we would have lost, the music industry and censorship and everything would be radically different these days, I have a feeling. But luckily, they fought, the animal that was the PMRC, and they won. The music in this episode came from two different Twisted Sister albums, and also there's a song from the Strangeland soundtrack, which was Dee Snider's horror film back in the day. And they have other albums that I didn't pull material from. And keep in mind, this is Chordplay, so I'm not really focused on hits. I'm focused on chords. So even though some of the songs in this episode weren't really on the radio or on MTV, chord-wise, there's some interesting things happening, and that's my focus here. I'm not worried about hit singles. I'm worried about shaking things up, with chords. And that's basically what we're going to find in this episode. Some kind of lesser known, but really cool Twisted Sister songs. So here we go. With the opening, that's the song Love Is for Suckers from the album by the same name. A really cool riff. Something like this. And it actually opens with a harmonized solo, and that rhythm's, kind of behind that lead. But we're starting with this E power chord like this, and then B to C power chords, and then G to D right there, and then A to B. So right there. And then you got a little single note fill right here. And then go right back to that E riff again. And the second time right there, it's an extended, single note riff. Like that. It's kind of unusual. Kind of going back to that B. In the verse right here, an E power chord, and you're going to basically move to an E augmented right there, raised fifth, and right there a D over E, and then right there it's basically a B over D sharp right there, but you're doing it like that. So really cool twisted, chord progression right there, E augmented, a D over E to a B over D sharp. Start again with that E, the augmented, the D over E, and right there it's basically an A over C sharp. So I love that little twist with the chords. Really cool riff. Next up is the song The Fire Still Burns. This is from the album Come Out and Play, and it totally reminds me of the riff from Holy Wars by Megadeth a little bit. So maybe Dave Mustaine, is kind of secretly a Twisted Sister fan, but The Fire Still Burns is like this. So we're basically hitting this hammer on from D to E and then just pummeling that low E string. And you're basically targeting this E note from below and also from above. So it's D to E, the low E, and then G to E, and then the low E like this. And that totally sounds like Holy Wars a little bit right there. And then you're going to basically hit the C to D power chord there, lazily, kind of move it. And then this G, F sharp, G, and then right back to that E riff. Last time you're basically moving from C to G and then that F sharp and then that G, F sharp, G move again, like that. Very cool riff though, check out that song, really cool. Next up is the song I Believe in Rock and Roll, and this is also from the album Come Out and Play. In the intro there's actually two guitars, there's one playing these two triads back and forth, and the other one's playing this kind of single note melodic like picking exercise, and then a power chord riff. But the chords, the triads, it's really just E minor to C major, back and forth. And I'm going to loop that with the TC Electronic Ditto Looper right here. And then the other guitar is doing this single note kind of melodic riff like this. That's really just E minor right there, but you're doing right. And you kind of hear that combined, with those two triads. And then the power chord riff kicks in and you got this. Power chord, and then this F sharp, G to F sharp, on the D and the G strings there. And that B to A power chord. And then on the A, you want to do this E, F to E power chord. So it kind of mimics what we did in B. The next example comes from the song Wake Up the Sleeping Giant. This is from the Love Is for Suckers album, and it's something like this. So we're playing these kind of middle, power chords there, and we're starting with this A power chord. We're also moving that E note back to D, so that's kind of an implied A sus4, just for a second like this. And you're really just kind of hammering on that, D to E note right there. And move up to the C power chord and then back to G and then shift back into that A like this. You definitely hear pronounced vibrato on that chord too. I'm a big fan of adding vibrato to chords, as long as it's done tastefully, which that is. The second time you're going to play the C to D power chord, and then back to that A, add some vibrato, and then start with that A riff again. And the last time, just bang on that C power chord 3 times. And it's something like this. Next up is the song Me and the Boys. This is also from the Love Is for Suckers album. And honestly, Love Is for Suckers is an overlooked and underappreciated Twisted Sister album. You know, Twisted Sister broke up in 1988, and Love Is for Suckers came out in 1987, so that was the last, studio album. And Me and the Boys is something like this. Something like that. So we're basically starting with this B power chord, and then you hop over and you're grabbing B sus4 right there, that B note and that E, and you're moving back to B major and then back to B sus4 like this. And I apologize, my filing cabinet is actually jamming along with this there. I guess that B frequency is making my filing cabinet right there freak out. Can you hear that? Got a little rattle. Sorry, I tried to get rid of it, but I can't, so I'm just leaving it in there. But like this. Then move that B riff down to F sharp and do the exact same thing. F sharp 5, and then an F sharp sus4 to F sharp major and back. Last but not least is the song Heroes Are Hard to Find, and this came from the Strangeland soundtrack, which was Dee Snider's kind of failed horror movie back in the day. And it also appears on the compilation Still Hungry, which is the more recent reworking of Stay Hungry, the classic Twisted Sister album. So you can find this song a couple different places. It's very easy, but I included this mainly because Dee Snider made a horror film, and I'm a huge horror movie fan. So any rock or metal, musician that's also appeared in horror, and that includes, there's lots of people. I mean, technically, Key Marcello, Ozzy Osbourne, Gene Simmons, there's a whole bunch of famous, hard rock, rock and metal musicians that appear in horror films. And here, Dee Snider made one. But Heroes Are Hard to Find, something like this. Very easy. Big, huge ringing, G5 right there. Single note C, B to G. And a C power chord to a D power chord. But then on the D power chord, you're doing that kind of lift off that A note, and you're grabbing, D sus4, kind of like what we had earlier, but now in D right here. Just loop that riff. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Twisted Sister. Definitely a very important, influential band, and they definitely lit that spark and fire back in the early, late 70s and definitely in the early 80s. But, their club days are notorious. I did a lot of reading and research about that. Their early days, when they had the member changes, before Dee Snider and then after Dee Snider, basically that 70s era of Twisted Sister was really interesting. They were playing like extended, residencies and clubs and stuff around New York and New Jersey. They were playing gigs until 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and stuff like that. And they played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows. And they had a kind of a cult, like local following in that area. And then they started to release, these albums and became, MTV darlings or whatever. They had some great music videos, back in the day. And they definitely kind of paved that way, kicked that door open. And then almost like Quiet Riot and some of the other bands too, they kind of disappeared as the 80s went on, and their early influences there, but then they kind of dissolved or disappeared as that decade moved forward. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.